Hello, everyone, and welcome to Being Messianic. And this is where we're looking at the Hebrew roots of our faith. However, today we're looking at something a little bit different. And today we're getting ready to start Purim. And we've talked about last week that, and one of the things we do is we read the Meggillah or the Book of Esther. So we're going to be doing that today. It takes about 30 minutes. So I'm going to be reading probably rather quickly, but that way we'll have time for other things as well, questions and things. So just in a nutshell, we know that Haman hated the Jews and that the three main characters here are Haman, Esther, and Mordecai. And the whole story is Pur, which is where they cast lots. That means casting lots. And this is how it was decided when they would do the massacre of the Jews. So that's why we have it. And the commandments usually are reading the Megillah. A lot of times, as I read the Megillah, you can go ahead and stomp your feet, as some people do, or make noises. It's up to you. But a lot of times that's what people are doing. And then we have gift baskets to friends and neighbors. We also give charity to people in need, and we share a festive meal. I've also shared with you last week on rugula, and I'm giving you a chocolate version today. So rugula can be in many different ways. Not rugula, I'm sorry, hamantashen. I made rugula as well as hamantashen. So that's why I was thinking of that, because that's my favorite cookie. But hamantashen, I will share another recipe with that at the end. It's very similar. It's just adding chocolate. And we talked about it's a very fun holiday. It means let loose and do all of the different things. We talk about that there are costumes and things. There can be a fast for Esther's fasting. Now, Esther fasted for 3 days, but the tradition is to do it just for a day. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And on the scrolls, many of the Megillahs are absolutely beautiful, as you can see. Now, as I said, I'm going to be doing something a little bit. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. And I'm going to actually share a different screen. Well, let me see, because I'm not sure I can. Let me see if I can. Yeah, now I can't do it that way. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment. And as I said, what we're going to do today is I'm going to read the story of Esther. I am going to show it as I'm reading so you can follow along. I'm also in the chat. I'm going to put one if you'd like to see it way it's written when it's in Hebrew online. That will be something you can look at as well if you so desire. But it is very beautifully written, and that's why the scrolls are just so pretty. They're very fascinating scrolls. So let me go ahead and share this screen. And let's start the story of Esther. And as I said, it's tradition to go ahead and boo and hiss the name of Haman, but you don't have to. It's up to you. It's just a tradition. So, chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus which reigned from India even to Ethiopia over 170 provinces. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all of his princes and servants, the power of Persia and Media, and the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his exalted majesty many days, even 180 days. They had long parties back then. And when these days were expired, the king made a feast to all of the people that were present in the Shushan, the palace, both great and small, 7 days, in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where there were white, green, blue hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble. The beds were of gold and silver and pavement of red, blue, white, black marble. And he gave them vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse one from another, and royal wine in abundance, according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for the king had anointed to all the offers of his house they should do according to every man's pleasure. Also, Vatish, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, in the heart of the king was merry with wine. He commanded Muma, Bisar, Harbanar, Begatha, and Agbatha, Zethar, Charkas, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vatish the queen before him with a crown royal to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look upon. But the queen Vatish did not refuse to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore the king was very wroth, and his anger burdened him. The king said to the wise men, which he knew the times, so were the king's manner toward them, knew the law and judgment. And next to him was Karshishnath, Shethar, Admathar, Tarish, Mercies, Mersina, and Memucan, the seven princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom. What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she's not performed the commandment of King Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? And Memucan answered the king and for all the princes, Vashti the queen has done wrong to the king not only, but to the princes and to the people that are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the deed that queen shall come abroad to all women, so they should despise their husband in their eyes. When it was reported that King Ahasuerus commanded Vashti to the queen to be brought in before him, and she came not. Likewise, all the ladies of Persia and Media will stand at the day unto the king's princes, which have heard of the deed of the queen. There should be much arise, much contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, go to the royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of Persia and Medes, that it not be altered. The Vashti can no longer come before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate to another who is better than she. And when the king's decree, which he shall make, be published throughout all of his empire, for it's great, the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both to and great and small. And the saying pleased the king and the princes. And the king did according to the word of Memucan. And he sent letters to all the king's provinces and to every province according to the writing thereof, to the people after their own language, that every man should rule in his own house, and it be should published according to the language of every people. Chapter 2. After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what had she done, and was decreed against her. And the king's servant that ministered him said, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. Let the king anoint officers in all the province of his kingdoms, that they may gather together the fair young virgins unto Shushan the palace, to the house of the women, under the custody of Haggai, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, and let their things be for purification given to them. And the maiden which pleaseth the king be queen instead of Vashti. And this pleased the king, and he did so. Now in Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. He'd been carried away from Jerusalem with a captivity that carried Jehoiachin, king of Judah, who Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. And the maid was fair and beautiful, and Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, when many maidens were gathered unto Shushan to the palace and the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also to the king's house, to the custody of Haggai, the keeper of women. And the maiden pleased him, and she obtained kindness of him, and he speedily gave her things for purification, such things as belonged to her. 7 maidens which were meant to be given to her out of the king's house, he preferred her and her maids unto the best place of the house of the women. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred, for Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the women's house to know how Esther did and what would become of her. Now, when it was every maid's turn to go into King Ahasuerus, after she'd been given 12 months, according to the manner of women, for were the days of the purification accomplished, to wit 6 months of oil and myrrh, and then they had 6 months of sweet odors and other things for purifying the women. And this came every maiden to the king. Whatsoever she desired was given to her to go out of the house of the women unto the king's house. In the evening she went, and the morrow she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shenagaz, the king's chamberlain, which kept the concubines. She came into the king no more, except the king delighted in her, and she was called by name. Now it was the turn of Esther, daughter of Ahaziah, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken for her his daughter, was to come unto the king. She required nothing but what Haggai, the king's chamberlain, keeper of women, had appointed. Esther obtained favor in the sight of all that looked upon her. So Esther was taken into King Ahasuerus into the house royal in the 10th month, which is in the month of Tebeth, in the month of 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther above all women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king made a great feast to the princes and servants, even Esther's feast. He gave release to the province, gave gifts according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai sat in the king's gate. Esther had not shown her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her. Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as she was brought up with him. In those days, when Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlain, Bagitha and Teresh, which kept the door, were wrought and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. The thing was known to Mordecai, who told it unto Esther the queen, and Esther certified the king, therefore, in Mordecai's name. And when the inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out, and therefore both were hanged on a tree, and is written in the book of Chronicles before the king. Chapter 3. And all these things did Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hagamentheth, the Agite, and advanced him, and set him above all princes that were with him. And the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and revered Haman, for the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow, nor did he revere him. The king's servants which are in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, Why hast thou transgressed against the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matter would stand or not, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not and did not reverence him, then Haman was full of wrath, and the thought he scorned to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for he should show him the people of Mordecai, where Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, that lot, before Haman from day to day, from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. And Haman sings into King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people, all the province of the kingdom, and their law is diverse from all people. They neither keep the king's law, therefore it is not the king's profit to suffer them. So if it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have charged the business to bring it to the king's treasuries. And the king took the ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hagamentheth, the Agite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said to Haman, The silver is given to thee, the people also to do with him as seemeth good. Then this king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, which is written in all that Haman had commanded the king's lieutenants, to the governors that were every province, to the rulers of the people of every province, according to the writing therein, and the people in their language, in the name of the king Ahasuerus, it was written, sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by post to all the king's province to destroy, to kill, to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, to take the spoil of them for his prey. The copy of the writing for commandment be given to every province was published unto all people. It should be ready against that day. The post went out, hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. Chapter 4. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothing and put on sackcloth with ashes, and went to the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. And before the king's gate, for none may enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And every province wherein the king's commandment, this decree came, and there was great mourning amongst the Jews, with fasting, weeping, wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it to her, and the queen was exceedingly grieved. So she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Then called Esther for Hattach, one of the king's chamberlain, whom he appointed to attend upon her, and commanded to give it to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hattach went forth to Mordecai into the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of what had happened and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy him. And he also gave him a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and declare to her, and to charge her that she could go unto the king and make supplication unto him, and make request for him for her people. And Hattach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And again Esther spoke to Hattach, gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All of the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whoever, whether man or woman, shall come to the king in the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of him to be put to death, except such the king shall hold out his golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called into the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai the Esther's words. And Mordecai commanded to Esther, Think not thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at that time, there shall be enlargement and deliverance arise from Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And Esther bid them return Mordecai this answer: Go gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, nights, or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and I shall go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. Chapter 5. Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in his royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther? What is thy request? It shall be given unto thee up to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seem good to the king, let King and Haman come this day to the banquet I have prepared for him. The king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? What is granted thee, and what is thy request? Even up to half the kingdom shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and it please the king to grant my petition and perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and will do tomorrow as the king said. Then Haman went forth that day joyful with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood up not, nor moved him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Now, nevertheless, Haman refrained himself. When he came home, he sent for and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. Haman told them of the glory of the riches, the multitude of his children, and all the things which the king had promoted him. And he advanced above all the princes and the servants of the king. Haman said, Moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet she prepared, but myself. And tomorrow I am invited to her also with the king. Yet all of this availeth me nothing, as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. And then Zeresh his wife and friend said unto him, Let a gallows be made up 50 cubits high, and on the morrow speak unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged therein, and go then merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Chapter 6. On that night could not this king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigtha, and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, What honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? And they said, The king's servants that ministered him. Nothing was done for him. And the king said, Who is in the court? Now Haman had come to the outward court of the king's house to speak to the king, to hang Mordecai to the gallows that he prepared for him. And the king's servant said, Behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, Let him come in. So Haman came in. And the king said unto him, What shall be done to the man whom the king delighteth to the honor? And Haman thought in his heart, To whom would the king delight more honor than myself? And Haman answered to the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought the king useth to wear, and the horse the king rideth upon, and the royal crown which is set upon his head. Let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most notable princes, that they may array the man whereof all the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback throughout the streets of the city, and proclaim before him, This shall be done to the man who the king doth honor. And the king said to Haman, Make haste, and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and even do to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all thou hast spoken. Haman took the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the streets of the city, and proclaimed before him, Thus it shall be done unto the man that the king delighteth to honor. And Mordecai again came to the king's gate, but Haman hastened to his house mourning, having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh, his wives and friends, the very thing that had befallen them, and said the wise men and Zeresh, his wife, unto him, If Mordecai be the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but surely will fall before him. And while they were yet talking with him, the king's chamberlains hastened to bring Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again to Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it should be granted to thee, and thy request, and it should be performed, even up to half the kingdom. And Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my people be given to me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, to be perished. If we had not been sold for bondmen and bondswomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. The king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he? Who is he that doth presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary enemy is this wicked Haman. And Haman was afraid before the king and queen. The king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went to the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request to his life to the queen Esther, for he saw that there was evil determined against the king. When the king returned out of the palace garden unto the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen upon the bed where Esther was. And the king said, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? And as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Harbanoth, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, Behold also the gallows 50 cubit high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. And the king said, Hang him therein. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified. Chapter 8. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman the Jews unto Esther the queen, and Mordecai came before the king, before Esther had told who he was unto her. And the king turned off his ring and taken from Haman and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spoke yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device against the Jews. The king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. Esther rose and stood before the king, and the king said, If it please the king, and I have favor in his sight, the thing seemed right before the king and pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letter devised by Haman the son of Meggillah the Agagite, that he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people? Or how can I endure the destruction of my kindred? King Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, that they hanged upon him on the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. And write ye also the Jews as liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. So the king's scribes called at the time the third month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 3rd day thereon, and was written according to all Mordecai had commanded of the Jews, and to the lieutenants and the deputies and the rulers of the province, which from India to Ethiopia, 120 provinces, and to every province according to the writing thereon, and to the people of their language, and the Jews according to their writing, according to the language. And he wrote in King Ahasuerus' names, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent the letters by post, on horseback, riders on mammals, cues, camels, and young dromedaries. Wherein the king granted the Jews, which were in every city, to gather themselves together and stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and cause to perish all the powers of the people and province that was sold them, both the little ones and women, to take the spoil for them prey. Upon one day in the province of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the copy of the writing for the commandment was given in every province and published to all people, and the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves upon their enemies. So the post rode upon the mules, and the camels went out and hastened and pressed by the king's command, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in the royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold, and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light, gladness, and joy and honor. And every province, every city, wheresoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, and a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Chapter 9. And the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and the 13th of the same, when the king's commandment, this decree, drew near to be put into execution, and the land and the day of the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power of them, though it was turned contrary, the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered together in the cities of all the province of King Ahasuerus to lay hand on that sought their hurt, nor could withstand them, for the fear fell upon all the people. And the rulers of the province, the lieutenants, and the deputies and officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and famed throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies for the stroke of a sword, the slaughter and destruction, and what they have those who hated them. And in Shushan, the palace of the Jews, they destroyed 500 men. And Parisida, Delphon, Aspar, and Perithia, Aldelia, Ridimuth, and Parmesia, Arisia, Aridia, and Valjatia, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hagman, the enemy of the Jews, they slew, but they on the spoil laid not their hand. And on that day, the number of those who were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan in the palace, and 10 sons of Haman, where they've done in the rest of the king's provinces. Now what is thy petition? What is granted thee, or thy request further? And it shall be done. Then said Esther, if it please the king, it be granted the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow according to the days and today's decree, let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. And the king commanded it to be done so, and the decree was given at Shushan that they hang Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews in Shushan gathered themselves on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan, but not on the prey, they laid not their hands. But the other Jews who were in the king's province gathered themselves together and stood for their lives and the rest of their enemies, and slew their foes 75,000, but laid not their hands on the prey. And on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and the 14th day of the same day they rested, and made a day of fasting and gladness. But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th therein, and the 14th therein, and the 15th day of the same day they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of Adar a day of gladness and fasting, a good day, and sending portions to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews that were in the province of King Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of Adar and the 15th day of the same yearly. And as the days of the Jews rested from their enemies, the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, from mourning into a good day, that they should have days of fasting and joy, of sending portions to one another and give gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and Mordecai had written to them, because Haman the son of Hagamenthai the Agathite, enemy of the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them and cast pur, that is the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that the wicked device he devised against the Jews should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they call these days Purim, after the name of Pur. For all the words of this letter had been seen concerning this matter, and all that came unto him. And the Jews ordained, and they took upon them and their seed, and this such joined of themselves to them, if they did not fail, that they would keep these 2 days according to the writing, according to the appointed time every year. And these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city, and the days of Purim should not fail amongst the Jews, or the memorial should perish from the sea. And that's why we do it today. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm the second letter of Purim. And he sent this letter to the Jews, the 120 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with the words of peace and truth, to confirm the days of Purim and their times appointed according to Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen, and enjoined them. And they had decreed for themselves and their seed the matters of fasting and cry. The decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Chapter 10. And King Ahasuerus laid tribute upon the land, upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and in might, the declaration and goodness of Mordecai, wherein the king advanced them, was not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. For Mordecai the Jew was next to King Ahasuerus, and great amongst the Jews, and accepted the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, speaking peace to all his seed. And that is the Meggillah of Esther. And we'll go back to our slide. Let me show this again. So that every year, now you know why that is told. And as you can see, it's told in the story that is to be shared every year. It's decreed that you're supposed to read it every year. And that's what you've done. So this for today, because Purim actually starts tonight. And one of the root words that I really thought was a really good one for this one was hapcha. The meaning is to turn, to overturn, to flip, or to change. And what's interesting, it means that the tables were turned. And it's actually quite prolific in the Bible. But in the book of Esther, of course, it's really seen quite a bit during the story. If you read this in Hebrew, it shows quite a bit of times. It in the Torah, it's 25 to 30 times. If you look at all the writings of the Tanakh and the prophets, all of these things, it's 95 times. But it's often referred to the physical overturning and transformation. And you can see why it's so important in this one, because while it appears dozens of times elsewhere, the book of Esther's, remember, Esther is not actually in the Torah, it's a Meggillah, it's a separate book. It's unique in its favor, this one. It has, it really talks about it, like in Esther 9:1, the phrase transforms the word into a symbol of salvation and hope, turning in a day of mourning and a day of joy. And if we look at the word, we can spell it out. And it's va na ha fu hu. Va na fu hu. I know it's kind of a strange sound, but this is also the turning from it. So that's why I chose this word for today, because I thought this was such a turning one. There's so many times that we think we know how a story is going to end. We know what God's got in plans for us, but things can twist and turn. And that's what this word is about, is it things can twist and turn and things can be hidden. And you don't expect the way it's going to end, but this is the way it ends. So that's why this is a special word for this one. And I did share, so hamantashen, I shared the poppy seed recipe, which you could put, instead of poppy seed, you can put jam or jelly in, which is what I usually do. And you can also make it with chocolate, but there's different ways. So in this recipe, you're just making unsalted and bittersweet chocolate. Some people will make actually the dough itself. They'll take powdered cocoa and mix it into the dough and make the cookie itself chocolate. Some people take it this way. They'll dip it into chocolate. I've seen them dip it into like a strawberry thing too. I've seen people take the chocolate and drizzle it on the top. There's just about any way you want. So if you haven't tried hamantashen, I would highly suggest you, because it's a great cookie. I don't usually make chocolate. In fact, I think I've only made it once. I usually make it with a jelly. So this time I used mixed berry, and I used and cherry, and made that way. But that is how we celebrate Purim. So I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up. And I know it's very different that I was reading the story this time instead of doing a lot, but last week was why we talked about what Purim is. So are there questions or comments about the story of Esther? Okay. Does anybody have any questions about how we celebrate Purim or any of these aspects or comments? Wow, it's a quiet group today. Well, I'm going to simply say that this is the first holiday we get into. It is a very fun holiday because it's time of celebration. And a lot of times during Purim, there's a remembrance. Like right now, unfortunately, there is bombing going on. And it's interesting where it's being taken place at. But there's a lot of people that throughout history have tried to kill the Jews. And that's why they always read this. Technically, this is considered a minor holiday, and I know it tells in the story that you have to tell the story forever and ever, and that's just what we did, is reading the story, and you're supposed to do that and have a feast and have merriment and all those things, but it's actually not in the Torah, so that's why it's not considered a total mandate, but yet it is normally done. So I hope that helps as well. One of the other things I know that I couldn't find the link to it, but I know that Pastor Rebecca Lynn has done What Does Purim Mean to Us as Christians? And it was a really good series that she did on that. I'm not sure if I could find it again, but it was a really good series about what do they mean and what are the two witnesses that mean to us and how do those tie into Purim. So I would suggest reading that, and I hope you enjoyed the story of Purim. Teresa.
Hi,
Oh,
Gail.
Teresa.
Hello,
Hi.
everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to share from the book of Esther something that over the years has blessed me, or that the Lord highlighted to me actually. In chapter 1 of Esther, verse 9, where it records Queen Vashti made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. The king was doing his feast. The queen also did her own, like wanting to show that I'm also the queen, I'll do mine. And after that, when she was sent for, she rebelled, she refused to come, there was pride there. But look at the other side in chapter 2, verse 18. After Esther had been made king, chosen to be the queen, the Bible says, then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials. So Esther didn't even need to do a feast for herself. The king did it on her behalf and named it the Feast of Esther. So just looking at two queens with different feasts, different motive, different aspects. One cost her crown. The other was elevated, and she didn't need to do another anything. The king did that. So each time I come across this book, it's always just been a blessing to say, when the Lord elevates us, we need to watch it. Thank you.
Oh, Teresa, that's a great point because it's true. We always have to remember, and I was thinking the other day about the parable about a rich man. It's harder for him to get to heaven than a camel going through the eye of a needle. And it's true oh, thank you for sharing that, Deborah, of the YouTube link, what Pastor Rebecca gave. Thank you for that. But I was thinking about that, and it's when you are rich and powerful, we're seeing a lot here in America there, and actually several places around the world. There is a lot going on about how corrupt and things that were done to, and in this case, it was young women, things done to young women and different things. There's a lot of things in the news about it. And these people have ultimate power and authority wherever they are in their country or in their business or whatever. And instead of honoring God and praising God and thanking God, they turned around and are, hurting, killing, all sorts of things and doing all sorts of evil. So it is where your heart is. Where is your heart? And I think that's the best. You're right. That's one of the best things about this story is where's the focus of the heart? Esther, what a famous line that, in Mordecai is maybe you were here for such a time as this. And she's having to go and put herself on the line. And what an interesting contrast between the two women. I hadn't thought of it quite like that, but thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have any comments about this? Deborah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, how God goes before us. He's our rear guard. When her parents were killed, she was just a little bitty thing. And Mordecai took her under his wing and took care of her for such a time as you were sharing, for her to be a queen. It was beautiful. And to save his people, to be used by God to help our people. So, God's people.
Yeah, and I actually was trying to look up a little bit more what happened to her and everything, and I shared with a few people beforehand, before the meeting, that typically they believe that Ahasuerus was Xerxes, the first king of Persia, and he ruled from 486 to 465. And this aligns perfectly with the timeline in the story, and all the dates match up. So that's why they believe that. And his uh, we do know about his wife. I want to say her name was Amatris, maybe. I'm not sure, but it's something in that line. And we know that his wife, the Greeks didn't talk nice about her. They actually called her ugly and things. So there were some of the writings say that she wasn't beautiful, but I don't know whether she was beautiful outwardly, but I think that Esther had that beauty of spirit. And I think that's what people saw, was that here's this beautiful woman and you've seen women that are very godly and how they have just this countenance, and men too, but women in this case that have this countenance, and you can just see what a beautiful person that is. They shine. It shines through. The Holy Spirit's shining through them. And as Christians, we see that we see the Holy Spirit shining through a person. And when you see favor on a Christian, you know, we always got to, you're right. What we were saying earlier, we always got to remember that we got to give that faith glory to God, because it's God that they are seeing. It's God's favor they're seeing. I have had the opportunity to have some successes at my job, and I know, and it's been very unusual successes. And I know it wasn't me. I know where it came from. I know where the ideas came from. I know where all that came from. And that's what we have to remember. All of those things come from the Lord. So this is a really good story to remember, that all of the blessings come from the Lord. Anyone else have any questions? Well, I hope that you go and look at the cookies and look at the time of celebrating and all of these different things. There's a lot going on in the world, and we should focus on the Lord. There is so many things going on, and we know there are things yet to come that will happen in the world. As Christians, we know we've gotten to read the last book in the Bible. So we have had that opportunity to see all the things that will be yet to come. And we need to focus on the Lord. Esther, she had to focus on not what could happen to her and what could happen to her people and all these things. She had to turn around and focus on the Lord. She focused on God. She focused on this, and she gave her all and took a risk because God told her to. Through Mordecai, she was being told to go to the king and to say, plead for her people, which she did. So it's a very great story, and really shows that what happens and the blessings that happen and the turning that we talked about that can happen if you turn around and do what the Lord tells you. So good story for that, and a good time to remember the Lord and all that he has. So if you are having tough times, how hard would it be? Your people are going to be killed and destroyed. You know that you are probably, even though you're queen of Persia, you're probably going to get killed because you're a Jew. So, and your uncle is going to get killed. All of those people that you know and love are going to be killed. And yet the Lord can turn it. The Lord can turn it around. So when you're in your darkest hour, remember, go to God. Go to God. Just trust him. It's being repeated again in some ways. Yes, there's some things going on that's being repeated. And we'll see this in the book of Revelation when you read it. In the book of Daniel, you see that there is more thing to come. Any of the other elders or anyone wanted to touch on that, or any more comments? Well, I thank you all for coming and listening to the story of the Megillah. Like I said, this is something that I do and I read it. I hope I didn't butcher some of the names too badly. I've tried to go back through them and reread them just to make sure what the spelling is and the pronunciation. But sometimes if I did, I apologize for that I may have butchered a name or two here. Because there is quite a few names in there that are not that familiar. So I did try to make sure that I said them correctly, but I apologize if I did not. And with that, the next couple of weeks, we're going to be starting to get ready for Passover. Passover, we're going to start. Passover is such a big celebration, and one of the things that's really, I'm changing my order of things slightly because the Lord put it on my heart we always look as Jesus as the Savior and look at him as God and stuff. We're going to look about how he would have lived in the time. Next week, we're going to be looking at how he would have lived in the times he lived in. So we call him a carpenter. What does that mean? What does the root word mean to that? What does all of this mean? So I've really been on this. I want to get to know Jesus of who he is and who he was. And we can look at the times of what people were doing at that time to kind of see a story of what his life was like. What was the life of the apostles? Not just Jesus, but what was the life of the apostles like? What was it like to be a fisherman? It was obviously hard work. What was it like to be a carpenter? And why was he living where he did? What was going on in that area? So there's some things that I have found as I've been studying that I think that will be interesting, that'll give us a good intro as we start preparing for Passover. And then a week or two after that, we'll be looking at chametz and why we remove chametz from the home and how we keep it clean and what we do for that. So we're going to be looking at those things. So I hope you bring questions and just let me know if there's any aspect of that you'd like me to cover, because Passover is a really big holiday and it's coming up before too long here. So we will be celebrating Passover this year. So again, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you at other things throughout the week. There's a lot going on in the calendar. I know that during Sabbath yesterday, there was a lot of discussion about it, but be sure to check the calendar to see when things change and what's coming up. It's very easy for us to have to change times of things and stuff, so please make sure you do that. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and close this in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for allowing us to know the story of your people and to be able to see how you had mercy on them, just as you've had mercy on us, saving the entire people so that they would be here yet today. Thank you for that. And thank you for the story of Esther. What a great story, and teaching us how that ties in to the witnesses in the book of Revelations. Thank you for opening our eyes and ears to be able to learn these things. You are so good to us, so very good to us, that we get to hear about your ways and hear about the mightiness and the awesomeness of you. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for all things. You are a great and mighty King. And Lord, if we formed any ties with people during this meeting, we ask that those be broken so that we can remain holy unto you and only you. We love you and we honor you and we worship you and we thank you on this holiday. We thank you for all that you're doing each and every day for us. And we bless you and we sing your praises in your name. Amen. Shalom, everyone. I hope to see you, as I said, throughout the week, and then see you again on Sabbath services. And next week, as I said, I'm going to be looking at the times and life of Jesus and the disciples to kind of see what it was like at that time. Have a good day. Bye, everyone. Shalom.